Story 1. The Dealer's Trap. The GPS had been useless for the last 20 minutes, showing nothing but blank green space where road should be. I followed Jake's directions from memory, past the rusted mailbox, down the gravel path that seemed to stretch forever into darkness. My buddy Ryan shifted nervously in the passenger seat, checking his phone for the third time. "No signal out here," he muttered, staring at the black screen. Jake Morrison had been that rich kid in high school who always had connections. Now, 3 years after graduation, he was texting about premium weed at wholesale prices from his family's property. 2 ounces for $300, a deal too good to pass up, especially split between us. The farmhouse appeared suddenly through the trees, a massive barn-like structure with warm light spilling from the windows. Agricultural equipment loomed in the shadows like sleeping giants. Tractors, a backhoe, hay balers arranged in neat rows. The place reeked of money and isolation. Jake emerged from the porch, his familiar grin cutting through the darkness. Still tall and broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes that looked too clean for actual farm work. "Alex, Ryan, come on in, guys." We grabbed our backpacks and followed him inside. The house felt more like a workshop than a home. Tools scattered across every surface, empty beer bottles lined up on counters, the air thick with the smell of motor oil and hay. His cousin Ben was there, sprawled on a leather couch with a beer in hand. I remembered him vaguely from school, quiet, thin, with pale eyes that seemed to catalog everything without revealing anything. He nodded at us, but didn't speak. "You guys want a drink first?" Jake asked, pulling sodas from a massive refrigerator. Long drive out here. We accepted gratefully, settling around a kitchen table scarred with years of use. Ryan pulled out the cash, counting bills, while Jake launched into stories about running the farm since his parents moved to Florida. The conversation felt normal at first, just 3 guys catching up over cold drinks. But something felt off. Ben kept checking his watch, and Jake's stories had holes in them. He talked about maintaining equipment he clearly didn't understand, about livestock that I hadn't seen any evidence of outside. "This place has history," Jake said, leaning back in his chair. "You know what we found when we were digging that new septic line last month?" Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Bones. Old ones, buried maybe 6 feet down. The contractor said they looked human, but who knows? Could have been Indians or something from way back." The way he said it, casual and matter-of-fact, made my skin crawl. Ben smirked into his beer. Jake pulled out a plastic bag from a kitchen drawer, the contents clearly visible through the clear plastic. The weed looked good, dense, crystalline, properly cured. "This is that indoor hydroponic stuff," he said, placing it on a digital scale. "Grown right here on the property." "Nice," Ryan said, leaning forward to examine it. "Smells clean." Jake quoted the price, and Ryan started to negotiate. That's when I noticed the gun, a black pistol resting on the counter near the sink, partially hidden under a dish towel. My stomach tightened, but I told myself it was normal. Rural properties, protection against wildlife or thieves. Jake caught me looking and laughed. "Don't worry about that. Had some break-ins lately, tweakers from town mostly." The transaction should have been simple. Money for product, quick and clean. But when Ryan stood to leave, Jake remained seated. "Where's the rush?" Jake asked. "Stay for dinner. My cousin makes killer steaks." "Thanks, but we need to get back," I said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the isolated location and Jake's insistence. Ben finally spoke, his voice quiet and cold. "You sure about that?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Ryan looked between them, confusion clear on his face. "Yeah, we're sure. Thanks, though." Jake's friendly demeanor evaporated. "Sit down." It wasn't a request. Ben had moved to block the door, his hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. "What's going on?" Ryan asked, but he sat back down. Jake pulled the gun from under the towel, keeping it low but visible. "Here's the thing, guys. You came out here because you thought you were getting a deal. But the real deal is this. You're going to empty your bank accounts, transfer everything you have, and then we're going to discuss what happens next." My mouth went dry. "Jake, what the hell? We've known each other since high school, yeah, I remember." "You remember Tommy Hendricks?" I did. Tommy had disappeared 6 months ago. Police said he was probably on drugs, run off somewhere. Tommy came out here for the same deal. Really nice guy, paid up front, no complaints. He's still here, actually, out back with the others. Ryan's face had gone pale. "Others?" Ben pulled a knife from his pocket, casual as lighting a cigarette. 12 so far. Amazing what people will pay for good weed, and how quiet it is out here. I thought about the bones Jake had mentioned, the freshly turned earth I'd noticed near the barn. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. "No signal," Ben reminded me. "Told you that when you came in. We have a jammer." Jake stood up, gun now pointed directly at us. "Here's how this works. You're going to call your banks, transfer everything to our accounts. Then we'll discuss terms for your continued existence." My mouth went dry. "Jake, what the hell? We've known each other since high school, yeah, I remember." "You remember Tommy Hendricks?" I did. Tommy had disappeared 6 months ago. Police said he was probably on drugs, run off somewhere. Tommy came out here for the same deal. Really nice guy, paid up front, no complaints. He's still here, actually, out back with the others. Ryan's face had gone pale. "Others?" Ben pulled a knife from his pocket, casual as lighting a cigarette. 12 so far. Amazing what people will pay for good weed, and how quiet it is out here. I thought about the bones Jake had mentioned, the freshly turned earth I'd noticed near the barn. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. "No signal," Ben reminded me. "We have a jammer." Jake stood up, gun now pointed directly at us. "Here's how this works. You're going to call your banks, transfer everything to our accounts, then we'll discuss terms for your continued existence." My mouth went dry. "Jake, what the hell? We've known each other since high school, yeah, I remember." "You remember Tommy Hendricks?" I did. Tommy had disappeared 6 months ago. Police said he was probably on drugs, run off somewhere. Tommy came out here for the same deal. Really nice guy, paid up front, no complaints. He's still here, actually, out back with the others. Ryan's face had gone pale. "Others?" Ben pulled a knife from his pocket, casual as lighting a cigarette. 12 so far. Amazing what people will pay for good weed, and how quiet it is out here. I thought about the bones Jake had mentioned, the freshly turned earth I'd noticed near the barn. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. "No signal," Ben reminded me. "We have a jammer." Jake stood up, gun now pointed directly at us. "Here's how this works. You're going to call your banks, transfer everything to our accounts, then we'll discuss terms for your continued existence." My mouth went dry. "Jake, what the hell? We've known each other since high school, yeah, I remember." "You remember Tommy Hendricks?" I did. Tommy had disappeared 6 months ago. Police said he was probably on drugs, run off somewhere. Tommy came out here for the same deal. Really nice guy, paid up front, no complaints. He's still here, actually, out back with the others. Ryan's face had gone pale. "Others?" Ben pulled a knife from his pocket, casual as lighting a cigarette. 12 so far. Amazing what people will pay for good weed, and how quiet it is out here. I thought about the bones Jake had mentioned, the freshly turned earth I'd noticed near the barn. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. "No signal," Ben reminded me. "We have a jammer." Jake stood up, gun now pointed directly at us. "Here's how this works. You're going to call your banks, Transfer everything to our accounts. Then we'll discuss terms for your continued existence. My mouth went dry. Jake, what the hell? We've known each other since high school? Yeah, I remember. You remember Tommy Hendricks? I did. Tommy had disappeared 6 months ago. Police said he was probably on drugs, run off somewhere. Tommy came out here for the same deal. Really nice guy, paid up front, no complaints. He's still here, actually, out back with the others. Ryan's face had gone pale. Others? Ben pulled a knife from his pocket, casual as lighting a cigarette. 12 so far. Amazing what people will pay for good weed, and how quiet it is out here. I thought about the bones Jake had mentioned, the freshly turned earth I'd noticed near the barn. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. No signal. Ben Story 2, The Watchers in the Attic. I answered the job posting because I was desperate. 3 months unemployed, eviction notice on my apartment door, and winter coming fast. The ad promised room, board, and steady wages for farmhand work at a property outside Millfield. No experience necessary, just a strong back and willingness to work. The farm sat at the end of a dirt road that seemed to wind forever through dense woods. When the trees finally parted, I found myself looking at something from another century. A massive stone farmhouse with a slate roof, flanked by a red barn and several outbuildings. It looked like it had been there since the land was first settled. Herman Gruber met me at the front door, a man in his 60s with weathered hands and eyes the color of winter sky. His English carried a thick German accent, each word carefully chosen. "You are Marcus?" he asked, looking me up and down. "The one who called about work?" "Yes, sir. Ready to start immediately." He nodded slowly. "Good. My wife, she will show you the room. Work begins at dawn." Mrs. Gruber appeared beside him, a stern woman in traditional dress who barely came up to his shoulder. She led me through the house without speaking, past rooms filled with heavy wooden furniture and religious paintings, up a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor. "You sleep here," she said, opening a door to reveal a small but clean room under the eaves. Bathroom down the hall. Meals at 6, noon, and 7. Church on Sunday. The first week passed without incident. I fed livestock, repaired fences, helped with the endless maintenance an old property requires. The Grubers kept to themselves mostly, speaking German to each other during meals, observing me with careful eyes. Their daughter Victoria lived there too, a quiet woman in her 30s with 2 young children. Her husband had died in Afghanistan, Mrs. Gruber explained in halting English, and Victoria had moved back home with the children, Anna, age 7, and little Wilhelm, barely walking. It was Anna who first mentioned the sounds. "Do you hear them at night?" she asked one afternoon while I was splitting wood near the house. "The footsteps in the big attic?" I paused, axe raised. "What footsteps?" "Papa says it's just mice, but mice don't wear boots." Victoria appeared quickly, scolding Anna in German and pulling her away. But that night, lying in my small room, I listened carefully to the sounds of the old house settling. And I heard them, soft but unmistakable, footsteps moving slowly across the floor above me. The main attic was larger than my entire apartment had been, stretching across most of the house. During the day, it was filled with the normal detritus of generations, old furniture, trunks full of clothes, tools and equipment from decades of farm life. But those footsteps continued every night, always after the family had gone to bed. "Mr. Gruber," I said over breakfast one morning, "I've been hearing sounds from the attic at night. Want me to check for animals getting in?" He paused with his coffee halfway to his lips. "What kind of sounds?" "Footsteps, regular, like someone walking around up there." Mrs. Gruber and Victoria exchanged glances. Mr. Gruber set down his cup carefully. "The house is old," he said finally. "Wood expands and contract. It can sound like many things." But I saw how Victoria held her children closer after that conversation. 2 weeks later, everything changed. I was working late in the barn, organizing tools that had been scattered by the wind from an open door. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a vehicle approaching, unusual since the Grubers rarely had visitors. Through the barn window, I watched a pickup truck park near the house. 3 men got out, moving with the careful deliberation of people trying not to make noise. They wore dark clothing and carried bags that looked like they contained tools. This wasn't a social call. I slipped out the back of the barn and worked my way closer to the house, using the shadows for cover. The men were at the front door now, and I could hear low voices as they worked at the lock. They were breaking in. I should have called the police, but my phone was back in my room, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. Instead, I grabbed a pitchfork from the barn and approached the house from the rear. The back door stood open. I could hear movement inside, furniture being moved, drawers being opened, whispered conversations in a language I didn't recognize. Then I heard Anna scream. I ran into the house, pitchfork raised, following the sound upstairs. The intruders had cornered the family in the main bedroom, Mr. and Mrs. Gruber in their nightclothes, Victoria clutching her children. "Money," one of the men was saying in accented English. "We know you keep money here. Old German way, yes. No banks." "We have nothing," Mr. Gruber said, but his eyes flicked involuntarily toward a painting on the wall. The leader followed his gaze and smiled. "Check behind the picture." I was in the doorway now, but they hadn't seen me yet. The man tearing the painting from the wall had found something, a wall safe hidden behind it. "Open it," he commanded, pressing a knife to Victoria's throat. That's when I charged. I got the first one in the shoulder with the pitchfork tines, spinning him around and sending his gun skittering across the floor. The second one turned toward me, and I caught him in the chest with the wooden handle, knocking him backward into the wall. The leader still had his knife at Victoria's throat, but Mr. Gruber chose that moment to act. Despite his age, he moved with surprising speed, grabbing the man's wrist and forcing the blade away from his daughter. The fight was brief but vicious. These weren't random burglars. They moved like professionals, coordinated and efficient. But they hadn't expected resistance from an old farmer and a desperate farmhand. When it was over, 2 of them were dead and the third was bleeding out on the bedroom floor. Mr. Gruber called the police while I checked the children, both crying but unharmed. But as we waited for help to arrive, the dying intruder grabbed my shirt and pulled me close. You don't know," he whispered, blood flecking his lips. "They're already here, upstairs, waiting." "Who's waiting?" "The others. We were just the distraction." He died before he could explain what he meant. The police arrived an hour later, followed by ambulances and crime scene investigators. The farmhouse became a hive of activity as they processed the scene and took our statements. But that night, after everyone had gone and the family was trying to sleep, the footsteps returned. Only now, they weren't just in the main attic. They were in the walls, in the ceiling, moving through spaces that shouldn't exist, heading steadily downward. Story 3: The Ranch of Lost Souls. The advertisement had been simple. Ranch hand wanted, room and board provided, hard work, fair pay, serious inquiries only. I'd been drifting for months since losing my last job, sleeping in my truck and picking up day labor where I could find it. The prospect of steady work and a roof over my head was too good to pass up. The ranch sprawled across a valley 40 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through pine forests and open meadows. As I drove through the front gate, I counted at least 50 horses grazing in fenced pastures, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Sheila Hendricks met me at the main house, a woman in her 40s with platinum blonde hair and the kind of tan that came from years of outdoor work. She wore expensive-looking boots and a smile that seemed to take up half her face. "You must be David," she said, extending a hand with a grip stronger than I'd expected. "Welcome to Paradise Ranch. I hope you're ready to work." The house was impressive, a sprawling log structure with vaulted ceilings and windows that looked out over the entire valley. She led me through rooms decorated with Western art and expensive furniture, everything clean and perfectly organized. "My husband built this place," she explained as we walked. "Took him 15 years to get it right. Lost him to cancer 3 years ago, but I've kept it running. The horses need care whether there's a man around or not." She showed me to a small cabin behind the main house, furnished with a bed, dresser, and small kitchenette. "You'll take meals with me in the main house," she said. "Breakfast at 6, dinner at 7. Lunch depends on where you're working." The work was exactly what I'd expected: feeding horses, mucking stalls, mending fences, and maintaining equipment. Sheila worked alongside me most days, demonstrating techniques and pointing out which horses needed special attention. "That one's Thunder," she said, indicating a massive black stallion that watched us with intelligent eyes. "He was my husband's favorite, still looks for him sometimes, staring down the road like he's waiting." The first few weeks passed smoothly. Sheila was a fair boss, quick to praise good work and patient when I made mistakes. The isolation didn't bother me. I'd always preferred animals to people, and the horses were magnificent creatures with distinct personalities. But there were odd things I began to notice. The burn pile behind the barn always seemed to be smoldering, thin wisps of smoke rising even when I hadn't seen Sheila add anything to it. The smell was wrong, too, not just wood and paper, but something organic and unpleasant. There were personal belongings scattered around the property that didn't seem to belong to either Sheila or her deceased husband. A man's wallet wedged behind a fence post, work boots in various sizes lined up outside the equipment shed, a cell phone with a cracked screen half buried in the dirt near the burn pile. When I asked about them, Sheila's explanations were always casual and brief. Previous ranch hands, they come and go, you know how it is, always leaving stuff behind. But some of the items looked expensive, the kind of things people don't just abandon. The first real warning sign came during my 3rd week there. I was working late in the barn, treating a mare's infected hoof, when I heard voices from the direction of the main house. Looking through the barn window, I saw Sheila talking to a young man by his pickup truck. Even from a distance, I could see him gesturing animatedly, clearly upset about something. Their conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes before the man got back in his truck and drove away. When I mentioned it at dinner, Sheila's expression darkened. "Just someone looking for work," she said curtly. Seemed upset when he left. "People don't like being told no." She stabbed at her steak with more force than necessary. "Not everyone's cut out for ranch life. Some people need to learn that the hard way." That night, I was awakened by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Through my cabin window, I watched headlights navigate the ranch route before parking near the barn. The same pickup truck from earlier. The young man got out and began walking toward the main house, calling out Sheila's name. He sounded drunk, his voice slurred and angry. I was debating whether to intervene when Sheila appeared on her porch, wearing a robe and carrying something in her hand. "You need to leave," she called out. "I told you earlier, there's no work here." "Bullshit," the man shouted back. "You said maybe, then you changed your mind. I need this job, lady. I got nowhere else to go." "That's not my problem." He started walking toward the porch, and that's when I saw what Sheila was holding. A rifle, held casually but ready to use. "I wouldn't," she said quietly. The man stopped, swaying slightly. For a moment, they faced each other in the darkness, tension crackling between them like electricity. Then he laughed, a bitter sound that carried across the quiet ranch. "You're crazy, you know that. Fucking crazy." He got back in his truck and drove away, but I noticed Sheila remained on the porch for a long time after his taillights disappeared, still holding the rifle. The next morning, she was back to her usual cheerful self, chatting about the day's work as if nothing had happened. When I mentioned hearing a disturbance during the night, she waved it off. Just some drunk cowboy looking for trouble, nothing to worry about. But I was worried. The isolated location, the mysterious belongings, the way Sheila had handled that rifle, it all added up to something I didn't want to think about too clearly. I started paying closer attention to things around the ranch. The burn pile was active every few days, always at night when Sheila thought I was asleep. The smell got worse each time, and I began to see things in the ashes that looked disturbingly like bone fragments. There were more personal items appearing too. A class ring near the water trough, a watch with a broken band hanging from a fence wire, a baseball cap wedged under the porch steps of the main house. When I found a driver's license in the dirt behind the equipment shed, I finally had a name to go with my suspicions. Michael Garrett, 23 years old, from the next state. His photo showed a young man with a nervous smile and worried eyes. I pocketed the license and drove to town the next day, claiming I needed supplies. At the public library, I used their internet to search for Michael Garrett. Missing person reports, 3 of them actually. Michael Garrett, Tommy Santos, and James Chen. All young men between 20 and 25. All had disappeared within the last 2 years while traveling through the area looking for work. My hands were shaking as I read the details. Tommy Santos had last been seen at a gas station 40 miles from the ranch, asking for directions to some horse place run by a woman. James Chen's truck had been found abandoned on a back road, keys still in the ignition, personal belongings missing. And Michael Garrett had called his sister 3 months ago, excited about a job prospect at a ranch where he could learn about horses and make a fresh start. I drove back to the ranch in a daze, trying to figure out what to do with this information. Call the police? With what evidence? A few personal items and some suspicious smells? Leave immediately? My truck was low on gas, and I had maybe $50 in my wallet. That evening, at dinner, Sheila seemed to sense my unease. "You've been quiet today," she observed, cutting her meat with surgical precision. "Everything all right?" "Just tired. Hard work will do that." She smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "You know, David, I've been thinking, you're different from the other boys who've worked here." "How so?" "More mature, responsible. The others, they were all so young, so impulsive, always wanting to move on to something better instead of appreciating what they had." My mouth had gone dry. What happened to them? "The usual. They left for greener pastures." She took a sip of wine. "People are so ungrateful these days. No staying power, no appreciation for a good thing when they find it. Maybe they had their reasons." Her knife paused against her plate. "What kind of reasons?" I met her gaze steadily. Maybe they felt unsafe. The silence stretched between us like a wire ready to snap. Sheila set down her utensils and leaned back in her chair. Unsafe, she repeated. Interesting word choice. I found this today, I said, pulling out Michael Garrett's driver's license and placing it on the table between us. Sheila looked at it for a long moment, then back at me. Her expression hadn't changed, but something had shifted in her posture, a coiling tension like a snake preparing to strike. Where did you find that? Does it matter? Michael was a troubled young man, she said finally. Drinking problem, anger issues. He became violent when I told him the work wasn't suitable for him. So you killed him. The words hung in the air between us. Sheila smiled, but it no longer reached her eyes. Tommy Santos, James Chen, how many others? She stood up slowly, her